Hi folks, this is author Hugh B. Long, author of science fiction and fantasy infused with mythology. Welcome to my podcast. Here are chapters 3 and 4 from my latest novella, Of Ice and Magic. They picked their way up a craggy mountain, on paths that only a goat should have trodden. But Fornulf had been here before, and he knew the safe steps. Finally they arrived in a nook in the mountainside at what appeared to be a pile of rocks, no taller than a man's wrist. But from that pile billowed smoke, gently upward. Fornulf called out, "I seek a troll wife. Are there any troll wives around?" His voice echoed off the rocky walls. No reply came, and he shouted again. Carl looked perplexed, but said nothing. "I seek a limping smith with no balls. Are there any around?" came the reply in a deep baritone voice. Not the voice Fornulf was expecting. He shrank back, throwing arms out to hold Carl and Berengaria from straying forward. "Show yourself!" An enormous man, clad in a long mail hauberk and carrying a sword and shield, stepped out from behind a pile of rocks. Berengaria knocked an arrow on the bow and aimed at the warrior. "I didn't expect to see you out again any time soon, you old devil," the warrior said with a more feminine voice. "Wife kicked you out of your bed." "What?" Fornulf was shocked. He'd not ever seen this man before. "Take a step toward my father and I'll fill you with arrows," Berengaria said with a snarl. The warrior spied Carl and cooed. "Ooh, you brought me your handsome son. He is most welcome, Fornulf. You can sleep on the floor. He can share my bed." He giggled while Carl's face turned a bright red. The warrior pulled a vial of liquid from his pouch and drank it down, and suddenly the big man faded and a woman remained. The Saith Kona. "Call me Sybil," she purred. "Sorry for confusing you, old man. A woman alone in the hills has to learn to scare off any would-be visitors." She held up the potion and winked. "Nice trick." She was actually a comely woman, though older than his Hildegund had been. He noticed his son grinning at Sybil's brazen offer, now that she looked more like a woman. Not too many women around the farm, he knew. Sybil stopped smiling when she saw the look of utter grief on Berengaria's face. "What has happened?" That night they sat, warm and dry in Sybil's stone hut as rain lashed the mountain. The Saith Kona had told Carl to call her Auntie Sybil. Fornulf knew that was not her real name, for no spirit walker would ever relinquish such power to another, but he thought it sweet that she doted on the boy, treating him now like a son and not a potential lover. Not too many men up in the crags either, he mused. Sybil made Berengaria feel very welcome as well, gifting her a finely woven scarf and admiring her beautiful flaxen tresses. By contrast, Sybil was a woman of raven dark hair and milky skin. They ate well that night, and Fornulf felt relief that his children were safe. That tiny comfort was a pearl in a sea of oysters. As the fire crackled in Sybil's hearth, and all were comforted by a bottle of well-brewed mead, they talked and they planned long into the night. Sybil and Fornulf sat cross-legged on a dirty white bearskin rug. She held her hide-covered drum. "We shall make a journey along the limbs of Yggdrasil. The great world tree will allow us to travel to the homes of other spirit walkers and ask them to inquire with their folk about Chief Torgny's plans." Sybil produced a small wooden stick with a round ball of leather on one end and began pounding of the drum rhythmically. "Close your eyes, Fornulf, and relax. Listen to my words and heed my commands." Boom, 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 and on and on. She continued the cadence relentlessly, like a rowing master beating time for men pulling the oars, but hers was a never-tiring pace. In short order, Fornulf felt his mind and body drift. He began to sway slightly, and had to consciously steady himself. The drum continued. Boom, 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 boom. "Soon," Sybil said in a whisper, "you will see a great forest. Endless trees, green and lush. Do you see it?" Boom, 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 boom. "Smell the air," she continued. "Take in the musty forest, the pungent mosses, decaying leaves, life, death." The cycle continued. Boom, 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 boom. We are now standing on a path in a great forest. The many branches form a roof above us, shielding us from Suna's light. All that we see is a diffuse green light permeating the air around us, the eldritch glow of nature, of life. Boom, 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 boom. Fornulf gasped as he caught the scent. A forest. Trees. Mosses. He was there. He wanted to shout his excitement. My gods, I'm here. He'd worked with spirit walkers before, but only as a conduit to his life forging. He'd never journeyed with them. The drum continued, but now it was a whisper far away. Boom, 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 boom. Open your eyes, Fornulf. Tell me what you see, Sybil bid him. God save us, Fornulf exclaimed. I'm on a stone path in an endless forest. They walked for what seemed hours to Fornulf, and as they went, the forest became thicker and darker. The canopy seemed to reach up endlessly, but there was no sky to be seen. Sybil, what happens to our bodies while we're here? They are quite safe. They are still in my house, and I am still beating the drum. To your children's eyes we have not departed, and will not be gone long, though it may feel days for us. Time passes differently here between the worlds, sometimes slower, sometimes much faster. Where did you learn such things? From another saith Kona, like me. When I was a young girl, my family began to notice that I saw strange things which they did not. They knew I had the gift, and few have it. So my father sent me to apprentice with a great vulva named Sybil. She taught me many things before she died, and in her honor I style myself Sybil also, though I suspect that was not her real name either. She stopped abruptly. Here we are. Take my hand. She proffered a hand to Fornulf, who took it gently. He felt a sudden feeling as if he'd leaped off a house roof, as he'd done accidentally years before. It was a strange feeling, but passed quickly, and then they were below the path, in another's house, though the interior seemed composed of all silver outlines and no substance, like a painting of smoke. A man's form could be seen, and he seemed to take no notice of them, for he stood and stared at Sybil. Hello, my dear, the man said in a voice that echoed. Greetings, you old devil, Sybil said. Flattery will get you everywhere, he said with a grin. You mean it still works? She asked, eyebrows askance, fingers pointing to his lower regions. Cheeky girl, I assume you must need something. If you came here to flirt, you wouldn't have brought a friend now, would you? I do. We do, she added. The spectral figure bowed, sweeping an arm across his torso. I'm yours to command. You know of Chief Torgny? Sybil asked him. Balding, little would-be king of Aegisheim? Yes, I know him. Treacherous little bastard. Had his brother poisoned, the previous chief, and then pushed his nephew off his lands. Bad business. That sounds like him. He struck again, only now he's done harm to a friend of mine. The silvery outline of the man nodded toward Fornulf. Yes, he is my friend. His name is Fornulf, and he's a good man. A fair man who's treated me well when others would have shunned me. I should consider it a favor if you were to help him. If I can, I will. Sybil nodded. We need to know why Torgny has done this. He ordered Fornulf's house burned and his wife killed. We assume he was there to kill the whole family, but Fornulf and his son were away, and his daughter hid. Can you help me spread the word throughout the Four Farthings, and help to ensure that we are warned of any further actions Torgny might be taking? And if any of our neighbors have similar grievances with Torgny and will stand with us, we would know that as well. It will be done, and, Fornulf, I am sorry to hear the loss of your wife. I, too, have suffered such a loss. Fornulf didn't know what to say. He didn't even know to whom he was speaking, or to what. Thank you. Sadly, this is the second time for me. Fornulf wasn't sure why he'd mentioned that, but he felt that he should. Fornulf's eyes fluttered as he felt weight return to his physical body and a tingling sensation spreading from his toes and fingers to the core of his body. An image of Sybil's house began to coalesce in his mind and eyes, the sense of her collections of herbs and potions infusing his lungs. He stretched out and caught the sight of Berengara's hopeful face. Are you alive, father? Berengara asked. His throat was dry, so he nodded instead of speaking. The ever-present pain in his leg assured him that he was indeed alive. Sybil got up to fetch some mead which she offered him. He took a sip and felt the warm liquid rejuvenate him. Thank you. Father, Berengara said Your beard. What about it? It's much longer, much longer. Fornulf ran his fingers through his silvery beard. It was. I told you, old man, Sybil said. Time passes differently there. There's much I don't know about magic, he said. Just how many kinds of magic are there? Carl asked. If you don't count my secret potions and healing herbs, only 4, Sybil said. The first 3 are very rare. 2 you know of. Your father is a fjorsmither, a life forger. He deals with the life magic to forge great weapons and armor. I am a Saith Kona, a spirit walker, who deals with spirits and spirit walking. There are only 2 more. The Vitkur commune with the gods and other worlds to harness the power of the elements, fire, earth, air, and water. The Vitkur are very dangerous. The last type of magic is more common, and many can learn, though it takes a lifetime to master. That of the Virdskapar, the Weird Shaper. They have the power to see, to peer into the web of weird, and can read your past, your present, and possible futures through the use of the runes. Though be wary, your future is your own, and what you see may not always come to pass. Can you learn more than one kind? Berengaria asked. Sybil tilted her head from side to side. Not really. A witch like myself might also learn to read the web of weird, which in fact I have, but I've never heard of anyone learning more than one of the first 3 types of magic. She glanced at Fornulf, who was shaking his head. Nor have I, he said. Can you read the runes for me? Berengaria said excitedly. Will I become a great shield maiden? Carl laughed, and Fornulf tried to wave him to silence, but he might as well have tried to throw whale oil in a forge to stanch the flames. Berengaria was nothing if not mercurial, and she scowled at her brother for his scorn. Had they been born noble, she surely would have demanded a place in the war host so that she could make her name as a shield maiden. But they were common folk, and common folk needed their girls to work. Not tonight, sweet girl. It is your father's weird that I must read. He has plans to make. For him I will cast the runes. Berengaria pouted for a moment, but it passed, as did all her girlish moods. They gathered round the hearth while Sybil retrieved a small leather pouch. She pulled out a crumpled white linen cloth an arm's length to a side and smoothed it out on the floor. When I begin, Sybil said, you must envision the question you have for the Norns, the weavers of our weird. Only you will understand the full meaning behind the symbols. I will tell you what they represent, but you must puzzle out their meanings in the fabric of your own life. Do you understand, old man? Fornulf nodded. Good. Then close your eyes and reach into the bag. Draw 9 tiles. Fornulf gathered up 9 tiles, cradling them in his cupped hands. Now toss them gently onto the casting cloth, she said, pointing to the white linen she laid on the floor. Fornulf took a deep breath. He was nervous. Mentally, he asked the Norns to tell him about this summer and the outcome of his conflict with Torgny. He cast the runes. Each of the tiles was the size of a small stone, but were fashioned from wood. They had a warm, honeyed look to them, with a runic symbol carved on each, stained in red. Ah, Sybil said. See how some gather at the center of the cloth, while others are at the edges? The ones at the center are the seed of your problem. The ones at the edges are where your weird may lead you. The runes which are overlapping are complementary. He recognized many of the symbols and had a basic idea of what they meant. He saw Hagalaz, the rune of hail, as Torgny had requested on his sword. You see this rune? Sybil said, pointing. Of course, it means hail. Yes, and more. To a man's future it can mean disruptive change. You see how it's overlapped with Fehu? He nodded. Fehu means wealth, such as cattle and gold. It can indicate prosperity. That made perfect sense to Fornulf. The root of his current problem was another man's lust for wealth and power. Combine that with Hagalaz, and he had a lust for power imposing a disruptive change on his life. Down the cloth we have Kenaz, which signifies fire and knowledge. It is close to Yera, which means harvest. It can mean a harvest of crops, or the culmination of hard work. Here, fire or knowledge will lead to a harvest of some kind. What in the oceans did that mean, he wondered. Next, Sybil continued, we have Pertho, which means birth or chance. It is overlapping with 2 other runes, Ansuz, which means gods or divinity, and Algiz, which means protection. Now Fornulf wished he'd studied rune reading. There's a chance I might get divine protection? He wondered aloud. Sybil shrugged. Perhaps. You'll have to think on that for some time. Lastly, she said, pointing to a rune tiles on the farthest edge of the cloth, we have Manaz and Isa. Manaz means mankind, and Isa is ice. Fornulf smiled grimly. A frozen man. Perhaps that was to be his end? Alone in the frozen wastes? That's all I can tell you, good smith. I wish the gods and the Norns had spoken plainly. Sybil looked offended. Well, then how would I spend my days? A slow smile crept over her face, lighting up her eyes. She was beautiful when she smiled. Only 2 days had passed before Sybil was contacted by her fellow spirit walker. She and Fornulf were out walking on a mountain path to take some air when she felt a presence contacting her. She had to sit silently for a moment, eyes closed. When she opened her eyes, she spoke to Fornulf. Do you remember a woman named Edel? Fornulf cleared his throat. He remembered. She'd been a slave girl, a Welsh girl. He'd bedded one drunken night at the old chieftain's hall. Maybe... Sybil smirked. Oh, gods, she knew. When she heard what happened to you, she helped to divine Torgny's plans by asking the other servants. Brave girl. I wonder why she'd risk so much for you. He shook his head slowly, feigning ignorance. That was a good question. Why would she risk Torgny's wrath for a man who'd bedded her once and then never looked at her again? She'd been a lovely girl, but Fornulf had been drowning in guilt once he'd sobered up. And he'd made a point of never being alone with her, or even close to her, again. It seems our chieftain has larger ambitions, Sybil continued. According to Edel and her sources inside the household, Torgny wanted you dead so that you'd never forge another living sword, such as his Isbruna. He intends to consolidate power here, as the king did in the old country. Fornulf was burning with fury, and at the same time drenched with the coldest sorrow. Had he known of Torgny's concern, he would have moved or agreed not to ever forge such a blade again. It was doubtful any other man on the island could afford one anyway. For nothing, he mumbled, dropping to his knees. Sybil lay a hand on his shoulder. He's also put bounties on you and your sons' heads. Oh, and there's more. Edel also told us of a plot to poison the last chief that Torgny forced her to participate in. He threatened to murder her son if she didn't. Fornulf stood. What will you do? Sybil asked, compassion softening her words. Fornulf stood tall before the small hearth in Sybil's cottage. It seems our chieftain wants to take all the lands for himself, he told Carl and Berengara, and I have unwittingly handed him the tool to do just that. I must stop him. Father, no, please, Berengara pleaded. Let us leave this place. Can we not sail to Francia? Mother had family there. I cannot, daughter, though you must. I have too long turned an eye to the evil my work has done, telling myself that if not me, then someone else would make these weapons. I told myself a convincing lie so that I could earn glory as a smith and sleep with a clear conscience. No more. My self-deceit has cost your mother's life. It ends here. I know of no other life forger. I will be the last, but not because Torgny wants it, because I must. Though before I retire from this mortal world, I will make sure his sword is destroyed, and that he pays for taking your mother's life. I swear this to you, and to all the holy powers. Fornulf threw his arms wide and looked up. Do you hear me, gods? I, Fornulf, son of Harald, son of Ragnar, so swear it! Fornulf lay on the floor in front of Sybil's hearth, hand behind his head, staring up at the ceiling. Berengara and Sybil sat huddled in a corner, talking about whatever it is that women talked about, he supposed. Fornulf's plan was simple. He would forge a new living sword and find a champion to wield it. His champion would kill Torgny. Fornulf would destroy the sword, and they would all live in peace and prosperity. There were a few problems with his plan. Firstly, Torgny would be guarding his forge like as not, but Fornulf had built a second, smaller forge, a secret known only to him. He'd never been sure why he'd built it. He simply felt that there might be a need for it someday. Perhaps the Norns were guiding him, even then. Secondly, who would dare to think to kill Torgny? There were surely many who disliked the chief, but he was wealthy and had men to protect him. And who might try to kill Torgny would need to be paid a fortune, which Fornulf did not have. Or that champion would have to be mad. Sadly, the latter option seemed to be the only avenue available. Of course, Karl had volunteered to kill Torgny, and Fornulf admired his son's willingness to sacrifice, however misguided, but Karl did not have a warrior's heart or soul. He was simply a young man consumed with grief, and such was often a deadly combination. No, he would need a trained warrior, one who stood a good chance of killing Torgny, and with a living sword, an even better one. And he needed that same man to be a bit mad, or to have a very good reason to want to kill Torgny. And if such a man existed, why would he have not done so already? All good questions, and as the days passed, he found answers to them all. Torgny's nephew, Gunnar, was to be the keystone of this magnificent arch. He surely wanted his uncle gone so he could reclaim his father's lands, and the young man was a seasoned warrior, having gone raiding to the far eastern part of the world. Some said he'd been to the great city herself, Miklagard, and it just so happened that Gunnar had recently arrived back on the shores of the island. Apparently he was back to visit his widowed mother, who still lived on her father's farm, far from Aegisheim. That was good news for Fornulf, as it meant Gunnar was far enough away from Torgny as to be safe for a short while. If Fornulf could get to Gunnar and persuade him to his plan, or rather convince him that the time was ripe for reclaiming his own lands, then he might have a chance to honor Hildegund. Though in truth he knew he was satisfying his own honor. Hildegund, being the good and decent God-fearing woman she had been, would not have countenanced vengeance. He thanked the gods he hadn't converted to the new faith, as his soul thirsted for retribution. There was still the matter of a sword. To forge such a weapon, he needed a willing sacrifice. He might be able to have Karl finish the forging process. Then he could offer his own life force to the blade. Yes, he'd be willing to do that. But did Karl have the skill to master the process yet? He was getting ahead of himself. He didn't even have the materials to make the sword. He'd need much gold and silver. He still had some diamond dust and sky iron. How could he hope to obtain the equivalent wealth that one man on the island possessed? His contemplation was interrupted by shouts for help. "Karl!" Fornulf bolted from Sybil's cottage. The moon was waning, but still lit up the mountainside, and under that silvery light stood an adult mountain troll. Karl was trying to keep the creature at bay with a sword. The troll seemed to be toying with him, feigning a claw strike, pulling back, laughing. Berengaria and Sybil burst from the cottage, Berengaria with bow in hand. "Stay back!" Fornulf shouted. "Sybil, my spear!" Sybil ducked back inside. Berengaria pulled out her belt knife, holding it against an arrowhead covered in pitch and charred cloth. She produced a chunk of flint and struck it several times against the steel of the knife until the pitch erupted in flame. She knocked the arrow and loosed, all before Fornulf could warn against it. Her flaming arrow struck the troll's left shoulder, embedding itself in its flesh and burning the creature. It howled in its pain, a sound that turned Fornulf's blood to ice water in his veins. The creature snapped the shaft off, leaving the arrowhead buried in. Instead of hurting or even scaring the troll, the wound had infuriated it, and now Fornulf had no spear to hold back the beast as it barreled over Karl, knocking his son down, and charged at Berengaria. There was no thought to Fornulf's actions. There was only danger and his child. His body was the only shield he could provide her, and he gave it willingly, knocking her aside and throwing himself into the path of the troll. The impact was like being overrun by a charging warhorse, he mused, as the creature slammed into his body. He heard the sounds of breaking bones, his, not the troll's, and then the pain hit him. Berengaria did not hesitate when he'd pushed her aside. And by the time Fornulf had fallen, she lit and shot another flaming arrow, this time into the troll's back, as it had pivoted when it had collided with him. Fornulf saw it, turned back to his daughter, a glint of inhuman evil in its eye. It was not the dispassionate look of a wolf killing a sheep, for the wolf took no pleasure in killing the sheep, only in the nourishment it provided. This troll enjoyed the hunt, enjoyed the kill. Karl had recovered by this time, and hacked down at the troll's back as it moved toward Berengaria again. The troll spun, and Berengaria loosed a third flaming arrow, again in its back where it couldn't reach. The creature's flesh was now aflame, crackling like roast pork. It roared, and Fornulf winced. Once again, the beast turned back to Berengaria. Suddenly there was a flash of moonlight, and Fornulf could see flame glittering off a spearhead. Sybil thrust Fornulf's spear deep into the troll's belly, At the same time, Carl hacked at its neck with the sword, and Berengara loosed 2 more flaming arrows. Berengara stood triumphantly over the burning corpse of the troll. "You're a stupid girl, Bryn," Carl shouted at her. She scowled at him. "You yelled for help?" Carl was clearly flummoxed. "I was yelling for father, not my little sister. You could have been killed." "I saved you, didn't I? How about some gratitude?" She shook her head in disgust and tromped off. Sybil leaned over Fornulf, binding his broken bones and making him drink some foul-tasting potions. "And you're a stupid old man, you know that?" she said. "You could have been killed." He made to laugh, but moving at all was terribly painful. "You too?" "She's quite the little shield maiden," Sybil said, smiling, gesturing with her chin toward where Berengara had walked off. "Such have always been her dreams, though her mother and I did try to dissuade her dutifully. She never took to null binding or weaving." Sybil laughed. "Nor did I." "How badly am I wounded?" "No cuts, just 3 broken bones. Your left arm has 2 breaks, 1 upper, 1 lower, and you have a broken rib. Count yourself lucky, old man. The troll could have had you for lunch. Literally. Had your daughters not had those troll arrows ready..." "The old gods tell us when you walk out your door, have your weapon close at hand. I didn't think Bryn paid attention to all my silly stories." "Oh, you're lucky she did." He nodded. Yes, he was lucky to have 2 brave children. Though he was unlucky that he had broken his arm. He needed to forge a new living sword in a few weeks. Would his bones be healed by then? He doubted it. Sybil sent out a call to all her fellow Seithkonas. They were to spread the word to a handful of trusted men about Torgny's plans to grab power, and asked to contribute gold and silver for the forging of a new living blade. Some even offered their men and swords to the cause. In less than a week they had all that they needed. The materials had been delivered to a safe location, where Sybil retrieved them. Fornulf was shocked at the outpouring of support. Apparently he'd underestimated how poorly folk thought of Torgny. Now, all he needed was a champion. Tune in next week for more of Ice and Magic. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you want more free stories in audiobook or ebook form, head over to my website and subscribe for updates at www.hughblong.com. I'll also be offering subscribers other benefits like advance access to my novels and short stories, original artwork, and the ability to participate in my beta reading program. Thanks again.